welcoming you guys tonight for another organic audio session. With me is Sydney Erickson, got it right tonight, Nick Offelter, Roger Deerdorf, and Pastor Holly is still recovering, so we are welcoming with us tonight a good friend of mine, Miss Madison Hummel. Madison works with me at the Encore, so we're excited to get her perspective tonight. I know she's not quite as excited as I am, but I'm excited to have her here. So, well, Nick, let's kick it off with a little bit of history.
Okay. All right. Well, of course, tonight's topic is dealing with disappointment. And as a young man growing up, again, I know if you've been listening, you know that I've studied Civil War probably way too much than anybody ever should. But
what your wife says.
Right. Yeah. She'll definitely agree. But, you know, really, it's had a lot of influence on me as a person. And, of course, talking about dealing with disappointment, there's one man, I think, in the Civil War that if you just listen to a little bit of his story, there's a lot to learn in the way that he handles the disappointments. Really had a great effect on me, and it's a person that I've learned a lot from.
Thanks.
Right, yeah. No, not you, Michael.
Oh, sorry.
You weren't living then.
Yeah.
Roger was.
Oh, man. That's wrong. I'm leaving. Jeez.
Oh.
Thanks, Sid. I used to like you.
See, what happens. We're not live, so now we're gonna do this. Yeah. Gloves are off.
Gloves are off.
Yeah. Okay, so tonight I'm talking about Robert E. Lee tonight. Okay, so I think a lot of people would have this idea that Robert E. Lee came from, if you know anything about the Civil War, maybe you would assume that he came from a rich family. You know, the Lees came from a long line in Virginia since the Revolutionary War times. But over the course of his life, he deals with a lot of disappointment. And those disappointments start out very early. He's actually a child that he was not a planned pregnancy. So he was a child that his mother at that particular time, did not want, because her relationship with her husband was not well. Robert Lee's father was the great Light Horse Harry Lee, who served under George Washington. Well, Light Horse Harry Lee had a huge problem, not only with gambling, but just financial things. And it got so bad, back in those times, if you owed people money, you could go to jail. That's just the way that was. Or they could walk into your house and take whatever you want in order to fulfill that debt. So, and it got to the point where he was basically, chain and padlock the front door so nobody could come in. That's how bad it was. So eventually, to avoid his creditors, his father just leaves, and he's having some illnesses, things like that. So he leaves, and he's in the search of a tropical climate to not only to escape from his creditors, but try to improve his health. So from a very early age, Lee is without his father, and later on he will learn the reasons behind that. Also, his mother, who I think in turn, Lee becomes the man of the house after that point. And really his mom is his best friends. They are really close. And she will also die when he is a young man. So he loses both of his parents fairly early. Moving forward in his life, his wife, she will deal with a lot of illness. I think based on the fact that they had, I think, I should know this number, but they at least had 6 children, maybe more. And back then, of course, childbearing was very hard on women. So she had a lot of problems to where she was confined to a wheelchair. So he had that to where his wife, he's off in the military, far away from home all the time, and she's back home, and she's always sick, and he can't be there with her. So he has that. One of his children ends up cutting all the tips of his fingers off in a farming accident.
Oh, wow.
And that really, that was really hard on Lee. Again, I don't even know if he was there at the time. He just had to hear about these things. So
Like a letter probably, right?
Yeah. So, I think back then to, have one of your children disfigured, something like that, that was, so he has that. his career in general, he's a very decorated officer after the Mexican War. The general-in-chief of the armies at that time was a man named Winfield Scott, and he thought Lee was the best grade of officer in the entire army at that point. But of course, the U.S. Army at that time was not very large, and a lot of times, if it wasn't wartime, you were going out west. You were just in an outpost somewhere, just protecting people from Indians, things like that. So he spent a lot of his time in Texas. He did do a lot of surveying and stuff like that on the coastlines to try and help build up defenses along the coastlines. So he was really an important officer. He did a lot of great things. But over the course of 35 years, he will only rise to the grade of captain. So promotion was very slow. So he had a lot of disappointment as far as picking that career, and he was only able to go so far. And of course, so he was only able to make so much money. Then going into the Civil War, he has to make this terrible decision. And this is the thing, I'm not going to go too far into it, but it's the thing that people don't understand about the Civil War and about Lee in particular, is he had this terrible decision to make about whether to stay with the U.S. Army or to go with the South if they should secede. And of course, Lee really felt that he would stay with the U.S. Army as long as Virginia stayed in the Union. But if Virginia leaves, he's going with his state. Now, that's something that we can't really understand today because the country is a lot different. But back then, what you have to understand is Lincoln is calling for 75,000 volunteers to invade the South to uphold the laws of the Union, to almost enforce that the South stays in the Union. So you have Lee, who his home is Arlington Mansion, which if you know where that is, it's right across the Potomac River. You can see it from the Lincoln Memorial. So it's just right across the river from Washington. So if Lincoln sends 75,000 volunteers, where are they going to end up? They're going to end up in his backyard.
Yeah, right.
So you have to think of it in those terms that if he stays with the Union, in a sense, he's fighting against his family, his home, everything he's ever known, which would be a really hard decision, I think, to make. Today, I think that would be a hard decision for somebody to make. If we heard that the president was sending troops to Ohio for some reason, how many of us would say, okay, we'll follow the government rather than protect our own homes and our own families? That'd be a tough thing, no matter what your sense of politics are.
Yeah.
So, of course, the bad fortune is that Virginia does secede, and his wife actually kind of uses a biblical term that she says that he shed tears of blood over this decision. He just agonized over it because he was a very peaceful man. He did not want the war. He didn't agree with it, but he could not bring himself to fight against his own family and his state. And so he thought, when he resigned from the U.S. Army, he was hoping he would never have to fight. He was hoping somehow the war would get resolved somehow without that ever happening. Well, of course,
one day.
Yeah, in one day.
In one day.
We've already talked about that.
Was that last week's episode or week before? Yeah, one day.
So that's not the case. So then, of course, he becomes the highest ranking general in the Confederate Army, and he becomes the most influential general in that army. And he has a lot of great success in that first year that he becomes commander in June of 1862. He wins just about every battle that he fights in, or at least comes to a draw. So a lot of people think that within the next year, the South is going to gain their independence if Lee continues on the streak that he's on. But of course, he gets to Gettysburg, and things do not work out there. And as we were talking about when I said last week, what's the one thing that can...
Communication.
Well,
aha.
You remember.
Didn't even have
he
to
doesn't
say the whole
have that.
thing.
If you study the battle at all, it's because of that lack of communication. He loses contact with his cavalry, that he does not have that information, so he cannot go forth with a plan without intelligence. So that really cripples him there. So they lose that battle. But this is one of the great things about Lee is, a lot of times in these battles in politics, everybody wants to blame somebody else for why it didn't work out, why they didn't win. And Lee says on the battlefield, he says, "It is all my fault. I asked more of my men than what maybe they could do."
Wow.
He says, so he takes it upon himself to tell everybody, "It is all my fault, and you have to help me out of it the best way that you can. So there's never any finger pointing with him whatsoever. And he will go on fighting for another 2 years before the war ends. And then this is where it gets really good, is because at the end of the war, when Lee has to surrender to Grant in April of 1865, you have a lot of people in the southern states, a lot of congressmen, a lot of soldiers that have served with him, that basically they're telling him, Lee, there is no Confederate army, but you are the army. You are the one that these people follow.
Yeah.
Let's continue to fight. Let's go on with guerrilla warfare if we have to. We'll do anything we have to do but surrender. And Lee is able to look them people in the eye and say, no. He says, it is my responsibility to end this effusion of blood that has lasted 4 years. We are not going to go into some type of guerrilla warfare where thousands more will die for no reason.
Yeah.
So he's, instead of not accepting defeat, and he said he would rather die 1,000 deaths than accept that defeat. But he sees that he knows what that's going to do to the country. He knows how many more thousands of lives are going to be on his hands and on the hands of the country. So he does not agree with that. And so he does surrender the army. And, of course, he has to go back and do something with his life after the war. He's lost Arlington House. It becomes Arlington National Cemetery. Mm-hmm. And that's another disappointment, as he loses his home. Soldiers are buried in the flower garden so that he can never live there again.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He eventually will get a position with Washington and Lee. Well, it's Washington University at the time in Lexington, Virginia. Later it will be called Washington and Lee. Lincoln does pardon Lee, but Lee never gets his citizenship back. Citizenship back until Gerald Ford gives it to him in the 1970s, almost 100 years after the fact.
Posthumously, after he's dead, he regains citizenship.
Yes.
Wow.
And they all said it was because somehow somebody lost the paperwork.
Well, if you deal with the government, you get that. Like, I've had that.
You know, a lot of other people got their citizenship back, but he never did because of some, fallacy in the paperwork.
If it's still that bad today, can you imagine how bad it was?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, you're sending stuff by like Pony.
Horse?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Pony Express just quit coming out to my house last week.
I can't. Doesn't Sid deliver your mail? Like,
Every now and then,
Yeah.
picturing Sid riding around on a
last
pony.
time I saw her, she was on a horse.
I can honestly say, maybe somebody could challenge me on this, but with Lee, I do not think, even including Lincoln himself, I do not think there was a more religious, humble man on either side than Robert E. Lee. I do not believe there was any man that talked more about God openly in letters and in speeches, in general conversation than Robert E. Lee. And you could see that influence on him at the end of the war. And as I was saying about the guerrilla warfare, when they said, there is no country, you are the country to these men. And he said, no. He says, refusing to surrender would bring on a state of affairs that would take the country years to recover from. And then later on, which I'll scroll down here, I just want to get a couple quotes in. He encouraged all his fellow Confederates to go home who fought with me and help build up the shattered fortunes of our old state. And it should be the object of all to avoid controversy, to allay passion, give full scope to reason and every kindly feeling. By doing this and encouraging our citizens to engage in the duties of life with all their heart and mind, with a determination not to be turned aside by thoughts of the past and fears of the future, our country will not only be restored in material prosperity, but will be advanced in science, in virtue, and in religion.
What happened to that type of speech
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
in the world today, because now we're like, y'all just need to be nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Mic drop.
Right. Yeah. Like it's just so much more eloquent than anything that we're doing today. And even when I think about politics today, like that is, I mean, my gosh, he could have been president today the way that he
Yeah.
speaks.
Very honorable.
Right.
And the last one was, it is to be the duty of everyone to unite in the restoration of the country and the reestablishment of peace and harmony.
Wow.
So basically, the power that he had over the soldiers and the politicians in that government, he could have done whatever he wanted to do. If he wanted to prolong that war, he could have been the man to do it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But he saw it as his religious duty to end it and basically tell, because there was a lot of soldiers coming to him asking, well, what should we do now? Should we resist this? Should
Yeah.
we? And he's like, no, the exact opposite. The war is over. We've lost.
Except
And he had talked about it a lot of time. This is God's will. This is the way it was supposed to be. Now it is our duty to go back and do the best we can for our state and for our country.
Yeah.
And to God. And he always tried to have that influence over people after the fact. And of course, that has to be, like I said, not many of us know what it's like to be, okay, you're that general. You're the one that, and he was a very aggressive general, and he was very proud. And he wanted to win. I mean, I seriously,
Yeah.
he wanted to win. He didn't want to be the loser.
Yeah.
I don't think
Well, yeah,
anybody
no
does.
one yeah.
And so in that moment, he could have been anything but virtuous at that point. And,
Sure.
And he just had that natural ability to speak to people that way. And I think it had a lot to do because he did have so many disappointments in his life. He had so many things that humbled him.
Yeah.
And he made a conscious effort to stay close to God in all
Yeah.
things. And so when we talk about the Civil War a lot, we deal with this a lot today with, they've tore all the Robert E. Lee monuments down,
Yeah.
things like that. And I'm not saying all those reasons, because Lee himself was not for having those monuments, because he truly believed that it would keep those open wounds.
yeah.
So he didn't want those things. So again, but I think it's really important that we can look at Lee and we can draw a lot of that, the sense of who he was, despite the fact that he wasn't perfect. He may have not been fighting for all the same ideals that you and I would
Yeah.
fight
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
But anything he does, he's speaking about God and how we should handle it to what his will would be.
Yeah.
And he's incredible in that fact. I mean, he really is.
Okay, so you made a really great point that I liked, specifically talking about Lee losing his father and his mother. So his father runs off to some.
Yeah, I believe he dies in that. Where I don't know if he goes to Barbados or one of those.
Somewhere
but
sunny.
he never comes back. So
Okay.
Lee never sees him again.
And then he loses his mother at a young age.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I read when I was working through this disappointment part was that disappointment is often influenced by our upbringing.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really, he was almost seasoned that disappointment hit him differently than it does other people.
Yeah,
Because
that makes sense.
he was kind of used to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's good.
The
Like, this is all I know. So
right.
Yeah.
And to put it in today's terms in a kind way, and I don't mean this to be disparaging towards anybody, but kids who aren't raised with a father, they're used to the disappointment of dad not showing up for their birthday
Yeah.
because dad's never shown up for their birthday.
Right.
yeah.
Like they know that dad's not going to be there. But if God forbid, this Friday is Adeline's birthday. So God forbid I were not able to be there for her birthday. She wouldn't know what to do with herself because dad has always been there.
Yeah.
And so disappointment for her.
Yeah.
So now I think about that in her adult life. So
Yeah.
she gets married someday. God forbid. She gets married someday. And let's say that this husband is a traveling salesman and for whatever reason can't be home on her birthday.
Yeah.
She is not going to be conditioned for that disappointment because
That male,
the male figure in her
was
life
always
has
there.
always made
Yeah.
time for her and made sure that he was there. So that is, I mean, I think that's a great point for what disappointment is like.
That's so funny. I won't say who I know who's like that, but their dad was never in the picture and her husband is in sales and they long for, it makes their relationship better because he's gone 3 days out of the week.
Yeah.
But then when he's back, it's like, okay. And then Sunday comes around and she's like, all right, go on, get, you
Yeah.
know, like it's time. But
Yeah.
like, that's, you know, but her dad wasn't around growing up.
Yeah.
So she's
She's okay with
yeah.
she's okay with being alone,
Yeah.
right? The other thing that you put, I don't know what that note
I'm the
meant.
one that don't have any glasses.
No, I wrote disappointment is only going so far. I have no idea what that meant. And then the other point that you made was that he didn't blame other people. Robert E. Lee didn't blame other people. He said that this is my fault. I expected more of my people than they.
He, if after every battle, you would, if you were a colonel, general, anybody of high, you know, responsibility, you had to send a report in of your actions. And if he read anything that, if you know, one general would write something negative about another one, he'd be like, no, hand it back to him. Say, you have to change this, because he did not want that type of energy going on in his army and having it actually brought to the public, you know, the guy kind of infighting. And he had to deal with a lot of that. So,
Sure.
he was always like, no, that's not the way we're going to conduct ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy.
Well,
Because he never blamed anybody. So he was
it's
not
easy
going to
to
allow.
blame somebody else.
And that's where I was going with
know,
it. So
you know,
that immediately triggered that church hurt conversation.
Accountability.
Right.
Because everybody, well, the pastor didn't say hi to me this morning, so I'm never going. I feel disconnected. I don't feel like anybody wants me around. That's on you.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a you problem.
Like, I think about dodgeball last weekend, and I think about all of the things that we do. And, you know, if you don't turn out for that, that's
Right.
not
On you.
my fault.
That's right.
The church is open. We're here ready to love you. No, I don't come to everybody's house for dinner every week. I promise you this. You don't want me, my wife, and our 5 children in your house for dinner, because our congregation is older.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they have, you know, their nice little laid out things, and, you know, they've got books on the coffee table that aren't for coloring.
Right. Right.
But my kids, you give them crayons, they're going to
Right.
color.
Yeah,
Like, that's what kids do.
I got a whole box of crayons.
And what I was going to say is, it's not because my kids are bad, but they are conditioned for the environment that they live
Well, yeah,
in.
yeah.
So you take them out of that and you drop them somewhere else, and you tell them, I remember, oh, Lord have mercy. My wife is not real connected with her dad's family. She has several of them that she talks to regularly, but not all of them. And they called and they wanted to meet Emmett when he was a baby.
Okay.
And so she took Emmett, he was just starting to walk, to one of their houses, and he played with something on their coffee table. And they like snatched it out of his hand. And my wife said, never again will I ever go back there. They will never see my kids as long as I'm around, because these
That's
are
how they
babies.
acted.
They're
Yeah.
babies. Just because you're not used to having them around doesn't mean they're not babies.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? That's what the church is too.
right.
Like, we as leaders don't want to upset people, but it's also not our responsibility to make sure that you're not upset all the time.
Right.
That some of that's on you. You
Yeah.
carry the weight of being upset. So that disappointment in the church because the pastor didn't call you when you went to the hospital. Well, because you didn't tell anybody you went to the
Right.
hospital.
How was he
Right.
supposed to know
Don't
you were
read
there?
minds.
Yeah.
So you can't be disappointed with everything that happens in the church just because you didn't do your
you have
fair
your
share.
responsibility also.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, having Madison here, I can say this with the utmost certainty. Like, nobody quite understands that my job is not just a full-time job, it's a full-time and a half job.
Yeah.
Like, my phone will ring at any given time throughout the day. If there's an event going on in the evening, my phone will ring.
I forgot that. Was an old. It was. I don't know if it was. It was a business magazine, but it was an old issue, and right on the front page it said 55-hour week, and it was broken down like I don't know. It was like 40 hours of meetings, 2 hours of phone calls.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
broken, you know. And I mean, as soon as I saw that, I was, that's Pastor Michael.
Yeah.
And mine is, so then I go from work hat, take that off on the drive home, put on dad hat, and deal with kids and dishes and whatever stuff we've got going on in the house.
Yeah.
And then I take that off and come here and do podcast, prayer,
Right.
Sunday morning services, all of those things. And I have to juggle all of that.
Right.
And
That's-
I'm going to do my best to not disappoint God. I'm going to do my best not to disappoint my kids and my wife.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do my best not to disappoint my congregation. But my congregation ends up pretty low on the list because there are plenty of us here that we can lean on one another.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell the pastor every time you have a bowel movement. I don't care. But sometimes you need somebody to talk to, but we have other people who are willing to do that. Right. I will say this: last Sunday I said, we will have people prepared to pray for you if you want prayer. Not one person asked for prayer on Sunday after church. And it's because nobody approached them and said, can I pray for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but pastor didn't pray for me. Or this is a good one too. During that closing prayer, I prayed for Pastor Holly.
Yes.
And Dave because they were sick. I prayed for Ray and Teresa because I knew Teresa wasn't feeling well. And everybody else who wasn't there is offended because Pastor Michael didn't pray for me and I wasn't there.
How were you to know? You're not a mind reader.
Well, right. You may not have come because you were on vacation in the Bahamas. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I knew they weren't there because they were sick because they let
you
me
know.
know.
Yeah.
I can't be everywhere and I can't be everything to everyone. That's a big one. That is a big one.
Yeah.
Because then you're disappointed because I can't live up to your standards and that's hard.
Well, I think that's unspoken expectations too.
That's very true.
Yeah. So when you have those, that's how you get disappointed. And that you can't expect people to meet something that you're not explaining to them or communicating to them.
Sure.
So that comes in big time with church hurt, I feel like.
Yeah. So let's keep talking.
Oh, no.
I do that at work a lot. I do that
Dig
at work
deeper.
a lot. Yeah, dig deeper. Let's dig deeper. Let's keep talking. When there are unmet expectations or unspoken expectations, it makes it almost impossible for us to not disappoint people to some degree. Or
absolutely.
to even feel disappointed when we're the ones not saying what we expect.
Yeah.
Like I expect my people to volunteer at church. Now, nobody can say that that is an unspoken expectation
Right.
because I am very verbal about that.
Yeah. You're
So
very adamant about
when
that.
people don't volunteer or people don't show up to things and I'm disappointed, I'm not disappointed at one individual person or even the body as a whole. I'm disappointed that I can't figure out how to motivate people to be part of the body.
Yeah.
Like I can talk every Sunday for an hour and it doesn't seem to sink in for some folks. They hear the words and then they just walk out. It doesn't get anywhere.
Doesn't grasp.
And so that's disappointing to me.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
part where I become disappointed. So what else? Don't let it get quiet, guys. There's so much. There's so much.
I looked up what disappointment is, and I'll let you know what it is, but I thought it was interesting because as I was reading on, I'm like, oh, this kind of ties in with something in the Old Testament. So, disappointment is simply being discouraged or sad because of an unmet expectation regarding something or someone. Well, then come to find out, Moses is the king of disappointment. Disappointment into the people because of the expectations that his people
He
had.
could never do anything right.
Yep. And then as for the circumstances, after years of growing up like privileged in Egypt and everything, then he's disappointed in himself because he ended up the sheep herder.
Yeah.
So I was just like, that's crazy how that all ties together. I mean, that definition wasn't like a Bible definition or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, wow.
Yeah. You know, the other thing about Moses, and I always tell my wife this, Moses was never really alone through any of that because he had what people interpret as a stutter. He always had Aaron with him and that he was kind of his interpreter.
Right.
So Moses would like kind of tell Aaron what to say. Aaron would
understood
say
him
it,
and then-
understood it,
right.
said it. So, but they were never disappointed in Aaron. It was always in Moses. But for all we know, Aaron could have just been making stuff up.
Yeah,
He could have just been
that's so true.
I think he might have meant.
So I'm going to go with it.
And here's this, I say that because my kids grew up doing that. Aaron and Aiden, when they were little, Aiden never talked to anybody. He just mouth shut. So I remember one specific incident. They walked into the kitchen and Alyssa said, "Hey, what do you guys want for breakfast?" And Aiden immediately looks over at Aaron and Aaron goes, "He wants sausage."
Wow.
He said nothing. But that was the interpretation.
Yeah.
Apparently, the way he held his eyes and his mouth meant sausage.
It was a sausage mouth.
Right, it was so we don't really fully understand people whenever we're trying to speak for them, and I think that that's another great way to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Our expectation of what I think that Roger expects or wants this thing, and guilty. I'm terrible with gifts.
Yes.
I'm terrible with no. I love giving gifts. I'm a great gift giver. I'm not a good gift receiver because my mother-in-law my mother-in-law was historically, in my personal opinion, the world's worst gift giver. You could send her a link on Amazon to something and she would find a way to buy you something completely different.
It would be on Amazon, but it wouldn't.
No, you'd be lucky if it was on Amazon. She'd hop on Kohl's and get it. I don't know. Wish.
Exclusively
I don't know.
Kohl's.
But my wife always said, because her mom, we went to visit her mom at Christmas time to visit her, not to exchange gifts.
Yeah.
But she would always buy us something. And my wife would say, the only thing I want, Mom, are pajama pants, but I just want plain pajama pants, no print. Promise you, we would get there and they would have polar bears and Christmas trees on them. Every time it would be something wild. And for me, I am a terrible gift receiver because I want nice things. I want you to buy me one good gift and not
Rather than a bunch of little knickknacks.
gifts.
Yeah.
So she would buy me things like Bibleopoly. And now listen, while in theory that sounds great, if you know me, I only play one edition of Monopoly and that's it. So I'm never going to play it. If I am not mistaken, it's still sealed in the top of my closet. It's not who I am. Don't buy me clothes. I want to pick my own clothes. There are just some things I don't receive well.
Right.
And because of that, I am very disappointed when people buy me gifts. And then I have to fake not being disappointed. Oh, this was great. Thank you. As I'm dropping it into the trash can and running out the door.
And then they're like, hey, I haven't seen you wear that shirt, Michael.
Yeah, you know what? The dog ate it. But it just, that's who I am. And so I recognize that about myself. And so I'm careful about expecting gifts from people. I always tell the church, Pastor Appreciation Month, they always want to get me something, my birthday, things like that. Don't give me money because I don't need money. And what fun is that? I want you to get me something thoughtful. I want you to find a way to get me something thoughtful.
You got 50 cans of Chef Boyardee last time.
That is true.
What more do you want?
That was a good gift.
Yeah, plus a spoon.
Okay, but you can't eat Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can with a spoon. You need a fork.
Oh my gosh.
You can't do it. You can't. You have to have two spoons and pick it out. I don't know. But disappointment comes from expecting people to understand who we are.
Right.
But people don't know, I know most of you well, but I don't necessarily know everything that makes you tick and could understand what's going to trigger disappointment in your life. So being cognizant of the people around us and knowing that the world is disappointed in the church because we don't understand them.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say that the majority of us sitting here don't understand addiction.
Yeah.
The majority of us sitting here don't understand mental health crisis. We've never really lived it to understand it.
Right.
We know what we've read, we know what we've seen, but to really truly understand it, we don't.
Yeah.
And so then they show up here hurting or broken.
Yeah.
And when they don't want to talk to us or when they don't want to hug or when they don't want to connect with us right away, we don't understand that. And so we write them off
so
as
we give up.
damaged.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we never circle back and try to.
But should we write them off?
No, we should never write them off. But that's the problem. We're doing that because we don't want to deal with whatever crisis it is that they're in.
Right.
And Sid knows about crisis. It's a hard thing to have to try to figure out and deal with.
Yeah, you don't know it till you're living.
Yeah.
It.
And my background is no secret. It's come up a million times in my life. But when I look back at that time, that's not who I was. It's not even it's not who I am now, and it's not even who I was then.
Yeah.
It was a period that I went through, but that period that I went through brought me to where I am today.
Right.
It was a growing period.
Yeah.
Part of my testimony, and that was a valley that I had to recognize as a real place that other people can end up.
Yeah.
But I was so disappointed in all of the people who were there because they didn't understand.
Right.
You know why they didn't understand? Because I didn't tell them. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to take the time to explain it. I just wanted them to go, "Oh, we get it."
Yeah.
Well, okay, so then I'm just going to tell you that I understand why the world is hurt. I don't really, but I can say that I do and hope that that lie lasts long enough. Fake it till you make it. Maybe somebody will believe me. It's just it's such a big topic. It's such a big, broad statement. Can I read a definition of disappointment? Actually, this isn't a definition. This is a Harvard Business Review about and it's about psychology.
Okay.
And I found this on the internet. It was written in August of 2018 by Ketz Devers. I don't know who that is, but it's a pretty great statement. So it says, disappointments are inevitable, and how we cope with them are often a defining moment in our lives. And how we respond to disappointment is often influenced by our upbringing. Some people seek to avoid disappointment by underachieving, while others seek to avoid it by overachieving. And regardless of which way we lean, we can learn to respond healthily to disappointment by adopting a coping style that seeks to understand what has happened. So, kind of a mind-blowing statement when
Yeah.
you put it into perspective like that. I can cope with disappointment by overcompensating or undercompensating.
Right.
That's kind of a, where do you go from
Vague.
there?
Yeah.
Where do you go from there?
Well, you go from there to, okay, when you're dealing with disappointment, your mind always has to be on God.
Yeah.
Because in the end, it's not about what we want. It's not about what your friends want. It's not even about what your wife wants.
Sorry, Margie.
Sorry. And it's true.
It is.
At the end of the day, it's about what God wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so dealing with disappointment, I think I was reading about Elijah. Okay, and here's a guy who comes along and he kills all those prophets of Ahab and Jezebel. And he thinks, all right, I've done it. Great victory. And what does Jezebel do? Jezebel retaliates. He didn't see that coming.
Right.
He thought he had the great victory. It was over. He didn't compensate for the fact that, well, maybe this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. And, of course, Jezebel retaliates and says she's going to kill him and all his prophets. So what does he do? He runs away. He flees and hides. And God comes to him. And he says, go out and stand in the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper came. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." So the way I look at that is, okay, when we deal with disappointment, where do we start looking? What do we immediately do most of the time? Well, we go right to the wind, we go right to the fire, and we go right to the earthquake, which is we start, instead of going straight to
Dwelling on
God with the disappointment, well, we're going to go to our friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to go to our wife. We're going to go to all those outside sources that a lot of people are like, well, that's just not fair, and you shouldn't be treated that way, and you should do this, and you should do that.
You're seeking comfort.
Just kind of like Robert E. Lee when they're like, yep,
Yeah.
you should start guerrilla warfare. Let's, they're all just giving him all this wind and fire and earthquake.
Yeah.
Well, and
And it gets you stirred up and it gets you mad, and then you lose your focus on God and think, I didn't get what I deserved.
Yeah.
I did this. I expected such, but that's not the way it turned out.
Yeah.
So instead of listening to God and trying to find the next step, well, we listen to all the outside sources and we get mixed up.
Yeah. And then our
And
last
then-
resort is God.
Yeah. Usually that's
Yeah.
the last resort. But then in the meantime, we do all these other things that mess it up.
That's
Yeah.
unnecessary because
Yeah.
if you just would have went straight to the source at first.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was.
We don't take the time to realize, okay, this did not end the way I thought it would.
Yeah.
So
But maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe God has a
Right.
different thing in mind, but we just want to focus on the fact that we've been rejected or,
Yeah. Boo-hoo me.
boo-hoo me.
well, and then there's another great
And
biblical.
people love to
Commiserate.
together.
We
Yeah.
love to
Oh, yeah.
commiserate.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So then there's another great story, exact same situation, but this time it changes. It actually changes. When I think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego,
Yeah.
they go into the fire,
Yeah.
Yep.
knowing that they are going. If we die in here, It's whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And Nebuchadnezzar, he sees them in the fire and he's like, well, who's the fourth guy? We didn't put anybody else in there. There's only 3 guys in there.
Right.
And he looks like a god. He changes his tune immediately because he focused on that being the difference maker in his life.
that's good.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, so you've got 2 very conflicting stories about exactly what it means to turn straight to God. We have 2 choices. We can run.
Yeah.
And we can seek God in the earthquake, in the wind, and all of the in the fire. Or we can, while we're in the fire, we can just say, hey,
Yeah.
even if it is God's will that we die in this place, I would rather die in this fire
With
than
him.
to worship your gods.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Right.
But that's not the world.
No.
That's not Christians, let alone the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We love to commiserate. We love to have dinner with one another and complain about all the things that's happening inside the church that
I
are
was
wrong.
just going to say in the
Yeah.
church.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All the things that we don't agree with in the church. Did you know?
But we're not going to run for any council
Oh
or
no,
anything.
no,
to
no, no,
change
no, 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 no,
anything.
no. Did you know they moved the cross from the sanctuary to the lobby? Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Even though it was a fire hazard?
After 50 years, we moved that thing. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it really is. So this is probably jumping ahead just a hair, but when I was looking at this, I thought this is probably a great scripture as well. It says, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. And if that were not so, why would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am.
Yeah.
Well, there's no room for disappointment in that.
Right.
No.
Right.
Nope.
There is no room for disappointment in
Yeah.
that.
That's a promise.
It's
No
right.
ands, ifs, buts about
And this
it.
isn't
Yeah.
like so I'm reading it on my iPad and it's just black and white text because I've got it several things here. But those are in red letters. And I
Yes.
always tell you guys when it's in red, I can hang my hat on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's no interpretation, there's no guesswork.
Yeah.
Jesus is telling me that I don't have to have a troubled heart because he is going to go ahead of me and prepare a place for me. So my disappointment is with the world,
Right.
Yeah.
not with him.
Yeah.
But we like to blame him for the things that don't go well in our
Yeah.
life.
Well, and I think that goes even back to what we were talking about last week. Maybe the people that, okay, I'm taking, I'm going to go be a Christian. My life's going to be a whole
Yes.
lot better.
Yep.
Right.
Well, in all honesty, it might be better, but you're going to have to work a lot harder for that.
Yeah.
Well,
and
that-
God never promised us that it would be easier.
Yeah.
He promised that he would
Yeah,
never
God
leave
is not
us.
giving
Yeah.
you an escalator that goes up and
No.
down,
Yeah.
and
Well,
Yeah,
you
that's
just
good.
have to stand
That's
there
good.
and
And you go back to Elisha when Elisha didn't die. He was able to enter into heaven.
Right.
He just walks into heaven. The sky opens up and he walks into heaven. We aren't going to get that.
He got the escalator.
Yeah, it is very unlikely that we are going to get that. So we can't just wait for that to happen. We have to, so we go back to spiritual warfare. We have to be
Yeah.
prepared for the things that are going to happen in life.
Yeah.
We have to be ready to pray about it. We have to be
Right.
ready to defend
Right.
whatever is coming. But more than anything, we have to learn that we're going to be disappointed in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We think a lot about jobs. That's an
Yep.
easy one to be
Oh,
very
yeah.
disappointed in.
I was
Amen.
Well-
there a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
well, and that's I think I told you last week. I said, I chose this topic, and I said, well, I chose it for a reason, and I told you I think it's going to have a happy ending after all.
Sure.
because I was
Yeah.
I was struggling with the disappointment, and I didn't know if I really wanted to share it or not, but I think that I will. I think when we were talking about fear, I was talking about the simple fact of going and asking for a raise.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that was me. I
Yeah.
was actually talking about myself. And you talk about the fact that you know that you're worth it. You know that you've worked hard. You've done
Right.
everything
You
you need to
deserve-
do, and you
earned
really
it.
feel you deserve it. It's time.
Yeah.
And I gave myself a date. I said February 12th, Lincoln's birthday. I'm going in and asking for a raise. I set myself for that time. It's going to happen. So the time comes and something really terrible happens at work. We lost one of our main owners. He's on medical leave. He's really going through a lot right now. And I thought, okay, I can't do it now. Now is not, there's a lot going on. Now is not the time. So I'm going to back off. So I thought, well, I'll give it another 3 weeks just so they can kind of sort things out. We can get through this, move on. So I let it go. And then I set another date, like, okay, so I got it. So I'm at home and I'm like, and the way I chose to do it, I'm like, how do I do this? Because I don't want to just walk in and be like, hey,
Hey.
I'm worth
so
more.
what is the
Pay
most
me more.
professional way
Yeah.
to do this? So I sent him an email, nice professional email, just giving me a heads up of what my intention was. And I, of course, I Googled it about the best ways to do this and everything. I thought, okay, I think send them an email is all right, because then they can choose when they want to talk to me.
And reply and respond.
When they've got the
Yeah.
time. So so I was just nervous about doing that. So I finally sent it, and I'm like, okay. And then a couple of days go by, no answer. I'm like, oh, geez, what's going on? So then finally they send me an email. Yeah, well, I'm available to talk such time. But then now I got to build myself up to do the walk-in. You got to walk
Yeah.
in there and be like, okay, so I'm building myself up spiritually. And that's the spiritual warfare thing happening. Like, okay, you got to get enough, you got to just walk in there and do it. So finally I go in there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk in there, I'm going to do it. And there's somebody sitting there with the guy I need to talk to. And I'm like, darn it. So I have to walk away. And I'm like, now I got to do it a second time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So build myself all the way back up again. Go in there. And he's like, okay, let's go in and talk. So we go in the conference room, and it's very quick. I don't even think it was 60 seconds. But I just told him, I said, okay, I've been here this long, and this, and this is kind of what I'm looking for. And he's like, okay, well, let me do this, do that, and I'll get back to you. So a couple more days goes by, and he comes back, and basically all it is, he's like, okay. He's like, you said you wanted to be here. Well, here's where you are based on our entire package of everything that we offer, And I'm like, oh, okay. And it kind of threw me a curveball, because I'll be honest, I didn't realize how much went into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was very close. I was a
Like
lot
your
closer than
estimate?
I thought I was. And then he's like, I just want you to take that home and think about it. I'm like, and all I said was, well, what do you think? And he just goes, I just want you to take it home and absorb it. Just think about it. I'm like, okay. So then I thought, well, I've got a choice to make. Now, do I just say, okay, well, just leave it alone. Just, And I could have done that. I
Yeah.
could have just said, all right.
Worth a try.
It was worth a
Yeah.
try, yeah. But there was that thing in me where I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do that. I have to, if I let that go, if I let myself go, I'm never going to do it again.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm never going to have that faith in myself
Nope.
again.
You made it this far.
And I
right?
made it this far. And I'm kind of disappointed about the way it went at first.
Yeah.
But I realized that, okay,
It
I've
wasn't
got
a
to.
no. Like,
Well, that's
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I had to follow through. So I go back and I'm like, so I counter. And he's like, okay. So the same thing happens. And he's like, well, let me talk it over. So a couple more days goes by and I go back. And then we had this really great conversation just about my place in the business and what maybe I thought I wanted to do in the future. And he really expressed the fact that he thinks I have a lot of potential. So a lot of good came out of that.
yeah.
And I didn't walk away completely empty-handed. It wasn't everything that I wanted,
Yeah.
but I realized that that's the way that it works. So just that disappointment of, I really wanted to, have it all the way I wanted it. It didn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
But I realized that I had to accept the way that all fell. But a lot of good positive things did come out of it.
Yeah.
but in the future, you're going,
Yeah.
you're going to receive
Right.
more.
Right.
than what
And I
you
didn't
wanted.
go into that second meeting with kind of a cocky attitude of,
I was going to say, let me take off my pastor hat and put on my business hat for a second, because you are an anomaly.
Yeah.
There are few people who are willing to do that. Me being one of them. Like, it's not a situation that you're comfortable in.
No.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times what will happen is, okay, so let's look at the job market today. Let's look at what each of us are making today. If we were all to go get hired at new companies, chances are we would all make more money if we were hired pre-COVID.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
because the job market is harder to find good quality people, right? So people are paying more for people like us. So to walk into your boss and say, pay me what the market is currently paying somebody, because the boss doesn't always see it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
The boss tends to see it as you've been doing this for 3 years, 5
Right.
years, 10 years. You've always made X amount, and you can make more with these incentives and all of these things. Well, yeah, you're right. But in an economic downturn, how much more can I actually make?
Yeah.
yeah.
And so to be able to have that back and forth in a professional manner, because what's going to happen for you now is they've expressed potential for whatever you can potentially do.
Yep.
And so now when that, if it's a position, now when that position opens up, they're going to say, hey, remember when we talked to Nick about that?
Exactly, yeah.
And they're going to be able to have open conversation. Now, maybe you may never know that conversation ever happens.
Well,
Right.
and you also never knew that they were even thinking about you
Right,
for the
exactly,
Like,
exactly.
So, but there's a possibility that that's there. And then not just that, you are paving the way for other people to have those conversations.
Right.
You're paving the way for other people to be able to have some level of confidence to walk in and say, hey, I don't want everything. I would like to just talk about this and see, are we on the same page?
Yeah.
Are we trending in the same direction? And, I always start my conversations with, how's the company doing? Like, and I'll always ask that question, but in my mind, I say, how's the company doing? If the company is doing well, then they can pay more, right? If the company is in a recession, well, you're probably
Yeah,
not going to
yeah,
get more money,
yeah.
right? So those are things you have to think about. If you don't think about that before walking in,
Right.
forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're going to go in there very uneducated. So as I was looking, again, as I was reading, it's in my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. And that's Psalms 18:3. And that's the exact same situation. When you knew you were walking into that, when you knew, like, there was a certain level of distress, you knew that there was high potential for disappointment in that second conversation specifically, but that didn't stop you from being confident enough to say, I'm going to have the conversation.
Yeah.
But I had to be very mindful of the fact that, okay, it could be a no. This could be
Yeah,
a hard no.
absolutely.
Right.
And how am I going to deal with that?
Yeah.
Because part of me is thinking, well, if they don't, then
There are other
maybe
places
I'll-
hiring.
Because let's be brutally honest. Sometimes I work very hard, and if you see a lot of other people standing around talking most of the day, or just not, you
think that's
get a lot
more-
of
more
like,
places
why
than
am I
not.
doing this? Why do I do
Yeah.
this to myself? And you think, well, if maybe I'll just, and immediately in that thought, you have to be thinking, well, no, you can't. That's where you have to bring God into it, because
right.
at the end of the day, it's almost like, okay, you don't work for a company, you don't
Right.
work for
Right.
a person, you work for God. God, and again,
God
say,
gave you that job. Like, you're there for a purpose.
doing great things, good things doesn't get you into heaven. That's not the point I'm trying to make.
Sure.
Right.
yeah.
But if God sees that you have that integrity and that responsibility, that even in the hard times where maybe you don't think you deserve it, and you carry on and you still do the same job with the same amount of integrity and
Yeah.
energy and attention, I think that he will put you where you need to be
Absolutely.
eventually.
Yeah.
So it may not, again, it may be a disappointment.
Yeah.
But if, like you said, if you go talk to the wind, the fire, and the earthquake about it,
Yeah.
and
Right.
get a negative attitude
Yeah.
about
Right.
it, then most likely nobody's going to look at you and say, hey, I think he could be
Exactly.
that
exactly.
person to go to that next thing, because you took that disappointment and you behaved in a manner that
Everybody in the lunchroom
reflects
knows about it.
negatively.
Yeah.
Now you've done yourself a disfavor.
Yeah.
And God can't favor you in that, because
Well,
you're
you're-
not looking to him and what you think he would have you do.
You're looking
Yeah,
for reward in the world from that conversation.
Right,
And
yes.
once you get that reward, your heavenly reward
and
is shot.
And it feels
Yeah.
good for
Right.
a while.
That's true.
Yeah, it feels good for a while
Yeah.
to get that, but in the long run, it doesn't.
That's
It
what I
doesn't
was
pay
gonna.
off
That's
at
what I
all.
was gonna say. There are no secrets in my house. So, like, if you guys tell me something, typically Alyssa knows. But that's because I can't. Like,
Yeah.
there's a joke. Chase made a joke that we download data from our brains into our wives' brains, and then we recall that data from them.
Hey, what'd I say about
Yeah.
this?
Well, and like she tells me when we have an appointment. I don't remember that. Like,
Yeah.
I can't remember what I've got going on Friday. Turns out it's my daughter's birthday. Oh, shock. But that's the types of things that I do. But I don't go, so we have a rule, and it's are you venting or are you looking for solutions?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good.
Because if I walk into the bedroom and I slam the door shut behind me and I just start unloading about work, she has two options. It's to agree with me and say, yeah, that's not fair. That's stupid, blah, blah, blah.
Venting it.
And that's
Or
my
go
venting.
off the room.
Or she can say, let's solve the problem.
Right.
Let's find a way to solve the problem. So what do you want from me right now?
Yeah.
And that's a healthy
Well,
way
you-
to
you
have that
take
conversation.
that not only into your personal life, but into your professional life.
Yeah.
Like, I've had that conversation
Yep.
with you, and I'm like, no, I want
Yep.
The truth.
Yes.
I don't want comfort. I want the truth.
And I do that with everybody. You know, if you do a counseling session with me, I will ask you that question. What you just said to me, do you want a response? Do you want to solve that problem, or do you just want me to hear you say it? That's all I need from you. If you just want me to hear you say it, okay, you said it, now let's move on. If you want a solution, buckle up, Buttercup, because it's not going to be fun.
Yeah.
Because you're disappointed with something that you have no reason to be disappointed about. You're disappointed because you didn't get what you wanted, or you expected something greater, and it's just not what the time called for. So I want to, again, boss hat still on for a second. Here are 10 ways that good employees are abused. When you're competent, you get the thorniest and gnarliest problems. When you finish your work quickly, you're given more work. When you get a lot of work done, your manager expects a high volume of output every time. Very productive people are loaded with special projects and extra tasks. Productive employees tend to be curious about their work. They become a subject matter, and it's expected of them to be experts in all things. Highly efficient employees tend to find smarter and faster ways to do their work, and you're told, well, you can't change the procedure. Very productive people tend to be very focused on their work, and then they're told they're not social. Well, and I don't even need to go any further, but aren't all of those things true when you are really good at what you do? Okay. So now let's put on my pastor hat. When I come out of prayer on Sunday morning and I'm ready for worship, the last thing that I want is to be inundated with people's problems. Okay. I don't care that the bathroom toilet doesn't flush. Find somebody else. I don't care that you're out of coffee. Make it yourself. Those types of things, to me, I don't understand why people, because I'm a high capacity person and I can handle a lot of things. When I say, hey, I'm not going to deal with that right now, people are offended by that. They're disappointed that their pastor isn't taking the time to deal with that. 20 minutes before he steps into the pulpit.
Right.
20 seconds.
So, yeah, right. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And then they're even more disappointed as I'm coming out of the pulpit, I'm decompressing, that I don't want to talk about
the same stuff.
The same junk every Sunday after church. I'm sorry.
The same.
It's not that I don't care. It's that I don't care right now.
Right.
Like if you want to shoot me a text or give me a call, happy to talk about it, but I don't care right now. Right now, two things that I need to do when I step out of the pulpit. Go to the bathroom right now, because I've had 6 cups of coffee before I got there. Like I've got to go to the bathroom, and I need to decompress with everything that just came out of my mouth, because I remember about a quarter of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't remember most of what I say. Now I can look at my notes and go, did I even talk about that?
I do that with the podcast.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm driving home like, okay.
When Nick and I were talking, when we listen to this, we go, oh, I didn't even realize Nick said that. Or I didn't realize, because you're in the moment and you're thinking and writing down notes and things like that. You don't always remember. So, but the people become disappointed because they feel like I don't care or that I'm disconnected. And none of that is true.
Yeah.
It's that I need a minute to think and to process.
Well, and it's their unmet expectations.
Exactly.
That's what it all boils down to.
Right.
Okay. Madison, can we talk about disappointment?
Sure.
Okay. So I want to talk specifically about the wedding that we moved.
Okay.
And I hope, so I want to be, this is actually not a fun fact, but it's kind of a fun fact. So Madison came to work with us when
early 2021, I think.
Early 2021. And it was chaotic is probably the nicest word that we could use for it. So she was coming into an event center that was transitioning from having an in-house chef to moving to a catering company, but we still had lots of weddings and lots of clients that were expecting a certain level of service. And we were kind of in this place where we didn't really know that we could provide it. So we were struggling to solve a lot of problems. And then that big windstorm came through and it knocked out power at our hotel for 5 days, something like that.
Yeah, about a week.
And on day 2, 3 maybe, we had to make the hard call that we had to cancel a woman's wedding because we didn't have power. That meant our toilets didn't flush because they're all electronic flushers on all of the toilets.
Yeah.
There was no air conditioning. There were no lights, obviously.
This was last June, right?
Yes.
That was when I was on my honeymoon.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
I'm back and all these trees are down.
Yes.
So, I finally have to tell Madison we have to cancel the wedding.
Now this was what, like a week before?
This was the week of.
The week of. Her wedding is what, Friday or Saturday?
It was Friday rehearsal and then Saturday wedding.
Friday rehearsal, Saturday wedding. And this is maybe Wednesday, Tuesday.
Yeah.
No, it was Wednesday.
It was Wednesday.
Absolutely
'Cause
Wednesday.
We had one day.
Wednesday morning, I said to Madison, we have to make the call.
Yeah.
We have to cancel the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
So Madison steps into the grand hall and she calls the bride. And she tells this bride, I am so sorry, but we can't host your wedding.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't wait and hope the power came back on. Because we,
Right.
at that time, had no idea what the damage was to the building. If the power comes back on, how many of these lights aren't going to work? Like, what's the safety risk at this? We had no idea whether the air conditioning was going to work. We had no idea what was going to happen. So I remember telling her that. And I left. I just
What a guy.
bailed.
What
Yeah,
a
I just
guy.
bailed. I was
Go
like,
handle this.
Really supportive.
I'm out of here. And she had to call that bride and tell her. And I walked back into the grand hall about halfway through conversation with the mom.
Yes. the
Is that
mom.
accurate?
Yes.
And so she is sitting. It's set up for the wedding. The ceremony chairs are set up. We are fully ready for this wedding. And she's sitting in one of the chairs and she just lays the phone down beside her. And like you could just see like this
Yeah.
absolute. Now, there are 2 levels of disappointment in that story. Actually,
Yeah.
probably 5,
Yeah.
because you don't know all of the layers that
There's so many
fall
layers.
into this. So we have a new event captain at that point. Her name
Yes.
was Alexis, and Alexis is good friends with this bride and
yes.
is in her wedding.
Oh,
She's sitting in the other chair while we're making this call.
oh man.
So that disappointment.
Right.
Madison's disappointment in disappointing a bride. Like she feels terrible that she has to disappoint a bride. The bride's disappointment, the mom's disappointment, and then
Yeah.
literally the 10 other family members that called us trying to help us solve the problem.
Right.
So Madison makes the call. She sits her phone down. She gets up and she goes out to the sidewalk. And I told this in our first podcast, which people haven't heard. And she sits down on the sidewalk and she just cries.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I could do is sit as close as I could to her and just let her cry. Because there was no way to fix the disappointment that she was feeling in letting somebody down.
Yeah.
So I want you to share the rest of that story because that was 100%,
That was a God moment.
100% God.
Yeah.
All
it
of
was.
it. All
it
of
was for sure. I think, yeah, it was probably one of the most crushing moments ever that I've had to experience, which sounds kind of petty because yeah, it's a wedding world, but it's a really big day for somebody. You know, that's one of the biggest days of their lives. They're making a covenant with each other. And to know this bride and groom, it was much more than just your average bride and groom. I mean, they were genuinely focused on their covenant with each other. And, you know, as a Christian, you take on that responsibility of making that happen and making that a beautiful moment for them. And so for me, it was so deep. It was so deep. So to have to kind of crush them in that was so unbelievably disappointing. And I remember sitting on the sidewalk and just sobbing and just asking God, why this wedding specifically? Why right now at this
Whoa,
point of
time
time?
out. You've probably met some very
Yes.
bridezilla.
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, every bride.
And so that's what I was going to chime in and
this one seems like
Yes.
say the same
Yes.
thing.
Okay.
Both the bride and the groom were so kind and so
The
gracious
best people.
Yeah.
before this.
Yes, absolutely.
Like we didn't have any problems with
yes,
them.
like we were actually excited for this wedding.
For this wedding.
So it was just so crushing, I think. And I just remember asking God, like, why? And not just why, but how? Like, how do we just move forward from this? I think. And luckily I have a really good mom. So
Oh, wait, stop. I'm putting flag on the play. On the play. So Madison was raised Pentecostal. So like she
Yes.
gets us. So she like gets the whole thing that happens here. Her mom has been here before.
yes.
And
she
her
has.
mom is the best Pentecostal mom you could ever
She
ask
is.
for.
She is. Yes.
She will pop into the office and we'll chat. She is a fantastic woman. I absolutely love her. So
She is,
hi,
yes.
Mama Hummel, if you get to listen to
Yes,
this.
Mama Hummel will be very proud.
You got a few points.
Yeah. But I remember calling my mom and just crying, obviously, because that's how I process my emotions, as Michael will tell you.
It is true.
I'm sure he'll make fun of me in the
It is
future for
true.
that. So that's fine. You know who he's referring to if he ever says that. It's definitely me. But I remember calling her and just crying and saying, Mom, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, how do I fix this? How do I make this better? And she told me that it's so funny because I remember it. He who is promised is faithful. And I'm going to cry. And it was like from that moment when we shifted our perspective as a team, everybody just kind of shifted their perspective to not like, oh, this is terrible. This is such a disappointment. But let's make the best of it. Let's
Yeah.
make glory come from it. And I think it was one of the best weddings we've ever produced, which is wild to think about
Yeah.
because we moved every single thing on property to another property.
In under 24 hours.
Yeah, in under 24 hours. It was a like heat wave or something
Yeah.
crazy during that
Yep.
time. We had like minimal bodies
Yeah.
to help. But I don't even remember it. It was so crazy because it just happened so quickly. And so many things were just little God moments that when we look back at it, I think we have a lot more respect for it. But in the moment, it was just wild to see that like from disappointment, great glory can come. So if you're just faithful and trust in his promises, then that can happen.
We walked away from that wedding
Yeah.
in like a state of shock.
Yeah.
And again,
Like,
like
we did
in the
this.
moment, we don't remember most of
Right.
it.
Right.
But looking back, we're like, how did we move
I know. It's wild.
all of those tables from here to there?
Yeah.
How did we manage
Well,
to get all of the decor from here
Yeah.
to
Just
how did we
setting up
manage
a
to
wedding,
staff
yeah.
it
Yeah.
Yeah.
from here to there? All of those things were amazing moments. But my favorite part of all of that is that after it was done, the mother of that bride brought them a basket of goodies
Yeah.
like you could never imagine because they were in awe that we did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, they called us and they said, we found another venue. And we were all sitting in the lobby of a dark hotel,
Yeah.
looking at each other. Like we've got floor plans laying in front of us, and we're like, well, we don't know what this place looks like. And I had been to the venue before, so I knew. So I'm
Yeah.
like drawing like these hand drawings of this
Yes,
venue.
yes.
And finally, I looked at Madison and I said, we just need to go there.
Yeah.
And she said, what do you mean? I'm like, let's go. Let's all get in the car. We're going there. We get there, and the family is standing in the parking lot waiting to go in.
Yeah.
And they said immediately they knew that they had nothing to worry about because we were there.
Yeah. They didn't ask you to come.
No,
Yeah.
no, and we weren't
There was
obligated
just
to
a
be
sense
there.
of peace.
Right.
We
Yeah.
weren't obligated to be there, but we knew that we were going to make something good of this. That even through all of the hard things that we were going to have to do, that bride could have been incredibly disappointed and could have been
Yeah.
like we could have just let her go. It wasn't
Oh,
our problem
absolutely.
at that point.
Yeah, we
Issue a refund and it's not my problem.
Yeah.
But that's not who we are or who we
No.
wanted to be. It never has been. And so it's funny because Madison and I have an emotional connection because of
Yeah.
that. Like it's not who we are to let people be disappointed.
Right.
We want to do what's right, not just for people, but for the kingdom.
Right.
And so it changes how we operate on a day to day. Now we are lucky because we are blessed with a group of owners who are Christians. They worked in churches
Right.
before they started this business.
Right.
So during COVID, we were opening executive level meetings in prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like not everybody can say that about the business that they work for. Don't get me wrong. We have a good time and we laugh and we carry on, but
Yeah.
we know how to treat people because we want them to see Christ in us, even in the business world.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So unfortunately we have hit an hour and Nick has somewhere to be. Volleyball. So can we do this again next week? Can we just I don't feel like we're done.
Part two?
Part two.
No,
Let's do.
It was like 3 minutes in. I'm like, this is going to be a part
Yeah,
two.
yeah. Well, because Nick, you're like even the intro of that was so great. There was
Yeah.
so much context to that history. Like, I mean, my gosh, you could every week. There's so much there. So, okay. So, here's what I want to do then. Who wants to pray us out tonight? Who wants to pray? Madison, you want to do it?
Sure.
We do? Okay, hold on one second. I gotta prep. I normally am ready, but I was in the moment there. So, if you just pray us out for this evening, and then we'll come back next week and we'll do the same thing and we'll wrap this up. Does that sound good?
Very good.
Okay.
All right. Heavenly Father, we come to you right now and we just say thank you. Thank you for this time that we've been able to share together. Thank you for the voices that you brought to this table. We pray that the voices that come to this table carry weight that can go out and reach people that you want to hear this message, God. We thank you for your promises that they are yes and amen always, and that we can cling to those in times of disappointment, and that in the end, it's all for your glory, God. We thank you for that. We love you for that. And we pray that we have a good week and that we come back for part 2 and we can still continue to bless people. Amen.
Amen.